How does someone vanish without a trace in 1976 and reappear almost 50 years later? This is the story of Mikolaj Salish, a mystery that haunted investigators for decades until breakthrough technology finally revealed the truth just days ago. Before we dive in, if you're into unsolved mysteries and cold cases finally getting answers, make sure you're subscribed. We're covering the most intriguing cases that science is helping us solve. Our story begins in Port Jervis, New York, a small city nestled along the Delaware River in Orange County. It's October 1976. America is recovering from its bicentennial celebrations. Gerald Ford is president, and a 76-year-old man named Mikolaj Salish has just disappeared. On October 1st, 1976, a family member walks into the Port Jervis Police Department and files a missing person report. Mikolaj Salish, age 76, hasn't been seen. No one knows where he went. There are no obvious signs of foul play, no dramatic circumstances. He's simply gone. For the Port Jervis police in 1976, this presents an immediate challenge. Mikolaj is elderly. He could have wandered off. He could have had a medical emergency. He could have been the victim of a crime. Or he could have simply decided to leave. Without witnesses, without evidence, the case goes cold almost immediately. The investigation stalls. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months. The 1970s become the 1980s, and Mikolaj Salish's disappearance fades into the background. Another unsolved missing person case in the files of a small-town police department. But here's where our story takes a dark turn. Fast forward 15 years. It's September 14th, 1991. We're now in Greenville, New York, a town about 40 miles northwest of Port Jervis, still in Orange County. A swamp off Woods Road is being drained. Maybe for development, maybe for maintenance. The exact reason doesn't matter. What matters is what they find. As the murky water recedes, workers spot something that makes them stop immediately. A skull. And not just a skull. Within a 7-foot radius, there are more skeletal remains. Some are partially buried under about a foot of earth. This isn't just bones scattered by animals. This is a burial site. The New York State Police are called in. Troop Middletown responds, and what they discover is both promising and frustrating. The skeleton is mostly intact. There are personal effects with the body, items that could help identify who this person was. But here's the problem. These remains have been underwater in a swamp for years, possibly decades. The water, the mud, the passage of time, all of it has taken its toll. The personal items? Degraded beyond usefulness. No wallet with an ID, no jewelry with engravings. Nothing that screams, "This is who I am." But investigators do find something interesting. Coins and other manufactured items that suggest this person went missing sometime in the mid-1970s. Mid-1970s. That's a lead. That's something. The investigators from the New York State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation start working the case immediately. They know they're looking at someone who likely disappeared between 1970 and 1980 based on the artifacts. They know the person was in this swamp in Greenville, but that's about all they know. They start pulling missing person reports from the region. They issue media releases, hoping someone will recognize a description or remember a disappearance from that time period. They check dental records. They try everything available to them in the early 1990s. But forensic technology in 1991 is limited compared to what we have today. DNA analysis exists, but it's still relatively new for law enforcement use. The databases are small. The technology is expensive. And without a clear lead on who this person might be, there's only so much they can do. The case goes cold. Again. Throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s, the skeletal remains from the Greenville swamp sit in evidence. Periodically, investigators revisit the case. They submit DNA samples to regional databases as they become available. They check new missing person reports against their unidentified remains, but nothing matches. Whoever this person was, they seem to have vanished from public record as completely in death as they did in life. By the way, if you're enjoying this deep dive into forensic investigation, hit that like button. It helps us bring you more cold case content like this. And stick around. The breakthrough in this case involves some incredible detective work. The real turning point comes in 2024, 33 years after the remains were discovered. The New York State Police haven't forgotten about their unidentified swamp victim. The cold case unit is still periodically reviewing the evidence, looking for new angles. And in 2024, they decide to try something new. They partner with Homeland Security Investigations to obtain a more detailed familial DNA, a sample from the remains. The technology has advanced dramatically since 1991. They can now extract better genetic information, and crucially, they can determine geographic ancestry with much greater precision. The results come back. The victim has genetic roots in Eastern Europe. This is significant. It narrows the pool of potential missing persons considerably. Now, they're not looking at every missing person from the 1970s in upstate New York. They're looking specifically for someone with Eastern European heritage. But the investigators don't stop there. They know they also have those personal effects from 1991. The items that were too degraded to be useful back then. Maybe, just maybe, modern forensic document analysis can extract information that 1990s technology couldn't. They send the personal property to the FBI's Question Documents Unit in Quantico, Virginia. This is the same unit that analyzes everything from ransom notes to forged documents in major federal cases. If anyone can pull useful information from decades-old water-damaged materials, it's them. And they do. We're about to reveal what the FBI discovered. But first, are you subscribed? We're covering more cold cases solved by modern technology every week. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. The FBI's analysis reveals something crucial. Based on the personal property, the victim may have resided in Port Jervis. Port Jervis. That name should sound familiar. That's where our story started, remember? That's where Mikolaj Salish was reported missing in 1976. Now the investigators have two solid leads: Eastern European heritage and a possible connection to Port Jervis. This is no longer a needle in a haystack. This is a focused investigation. The state police investigators start conducting targeted interviews in Port Jervis. They're looking for missing person cases from the mid-1970s that match their profile. They dig through old records, and remember, we're talking about 1976, before everything was computerized. These are paper files, hard copy blotter entries, physical records that may or may not have been well preserved. And then they find it. A blotter entry from the Port Jervis Police Department dated October 1st, 1976. A family member reported 76-year-old Mikolaj Salish is missing. Mikolaj Salish, Eastern European name. Reported missing from Port Jervis in October 1976, right in the middle of the time frame suggested by the artifacts found with the remains. Age 76 at disappearance, which matches the skeletal analysis. Everything fits, but after nearly 50 years, how do you confirm this? How do you prove that the bones in the swamp are Mikolaj Salish? You find his family, and you test their DNA. Just having a name isn't enough. After 48 years, investigators needed definitive proof. And that's where this case takes another fascinating turn. In 2025, members of the New York State Police Troop F Bureau of Criminal Investigation made a crucial trip to Florida to interview the surviving relatives of Mikolaj Salish. Think about that for a moment. It's been 49 years since Mikolaj disappeared. His contemporaries, people his age back in 1976, would now be in their 120s or 130s if they were still alive. This means the investigators weren't talking to Mikolaj's siblings or friends. They were talking to his children, maybe even his grandchildren, people who may have been young when he vanished, or perhaps weren't even born yet. These interviews served two purposes. First, they provided crucial background information about Mikolaj's life and the circumstances of his disappearance. What kind of man was he? Did he have health issues or mental health concerns? Was there any conflict in his life? And did he have any connection to Greenville, 40 miles from where he lived? But second, and most importantly, the investigators collected DNA samples from these family members. Those samples were sent back to New York, to the New York State Police Forensic Investigation Center. Lab technicians there compared the DNA from Mikolaj's relatives with the DNA extracted from the skeletal remains found in that drained swamp back in 1991. And after 34 years of uncertainty, they got their answer. It was a match. The bones in the swamp were definitively, conclusively, scientifically confirmed to be Mikolaj Salish. On November 27, 2025, the New York State Police issued a press release. After decades of investigation, after countless dead ends, after years of waiting for technology to catch up, they could finally give a name to the unidentified remains. Mikolaj Salish, missing since 1976, found in 1991, identified in 2025. It's a resolution. But it's not a complete answer, because the big question remains: what happened to Mikolaj Salish? Here's what we know. Mikolaj was 76 years old when he disappeared in October 1976. He lived in Port Jervis. His remains were found 40 miles away in Greenville, in a drained swamp off Woods Road. The skeletal remains were concentrated in a 7-foot radius, with some bones buried under about a foot of earth. And that's where the clear facts end. The state police have not released the cause of death. This isn't necessarily because they're withholding information. It may simply be that after so many years underwater, after decades of decomposition, the forensic evidence just isn't there to determine how he died. Did Mikolaj die of natural causes? At 76, especially in the 1970s, he would have been considered quite elderly. A heart attack, a stroke, any number of medical emergencies could have occurred. But if it was natural causes, why was he in Greenville, 40 miles from home? Why was he near a swamp? And why didn't anyone report seeing him there? Was it an accident? Did he get lost, have a medical emergency, and collapse near the swamp? But then why were some of the remains buried under a foot of earth? That suggests some kind of burial, deliberate or otherwise. Or was it something more sinister? The state police are still asking anyone with information about Mikolaj's disappearance to contact them. That suggests they don't consider the case fully closed. They've identified the victim, but they haven't necessarily solved the mystery of what happened to him. This is what makes cold cases so fascinating, isn't it? Isn't it? Even when we get answers, we often end up with more questions. If you're hooked on this story, make sure you're subscribed. We're diving deeper into the theories about what might have happened to Mikolaj in just a minute. Let me walk you through some possibilities, based on what we know about the case. Theory 1. Natural death and animal activity. Mikolaj was elderly. He could have had a medical emergency while traveling through the Greenville area. Perhaps he had family or friends there he was visiting. He collapses and dies of natural causes. His body ends up near the swamp. Over time, animals scavenge the remains, which could explain the concentration in a 7-foot radius. Rain and flooding could explain how some bones ended up buried under a foot of earth. The problem with this theory? If he was visiting someone in Greenville, why wasn't he reported missing from that location? Why did the missing person report come from Port Jervis? And would natural flooding and animal activity really create such a concentrated burial pattern? Theory 2. Accidental death. Maybe Mikolaj was out walking, became disoriented, wandered into the swamp area, and had a fatal accident. Perhaps he fell, hit his head, and ended up in the water. The swamp eventually covers him, and that's where he stays until 1991. This explains the location and the fact that he wasn't found immediately. Swamps can be dangerous, isolated places, but it doesn't explain why he was 40 miles from home, or why no one saw him in the area. Theory 3. Foul play. This is the theory that probably makes people most uncomfortable, but we have to consider it. Mikolaj disappears in October 1976. His remains turn up 40 miles away in a swamp with some evidence of burial. What if someone killed him, transported the body, and disposed of it in the swamp specifically because it was isolated and the water would hide evidence? The problem with this theory? There's no evidence of foul play in the police reports. No mention of trauma to the bones. No suggestion of violence. Of course, after decades underwater, subtle evidence might be gone. But it's worth noting that investigators haven't publicly stated they're treating this as a homicide. Theory 4. The organized crime connection. Here's something interesting that showed up in the investigation. The State Police Cold Case Unit worked with the FBI's Organized Crime Unit while researching Mikolaj Salish. Now, that could be standard procedure. The FBI's Organized Crime Division has access to a lot of historical records and databases. But it's also possible that Mikolaj had some connection, however tangential, to organized crime in the area. The 1970s were a big time for organized crime in New York. Port Jervis is relatively close to the New York-New Jersey-Pennsylvania border area, which had an active mob presence. Could Mikolaj have witnessed something? Owed money? Had some kind of business dealing that went wrong? This is pure speculation, but the involvement of the FBI's Organized Crime Unit is an intriguing detail. What do you think happened? Drop your theories in the comments. And if you're enjoying this analysis, hit that like button. It really helps us continue covering these fascinating cold cases. Let's think about the family for a moment. Imagine being a relative of Mikolaj Salish. Your father, grandfather, or great-grandfather disappears in 1976. You're told he's missing, but there are no answers. No body, no closure, no certainty about what happened. Years pass. Decades pass. You probably assume he's dead, but you don't know where or how or why. And then, in 2025, investigators show up at your door in Florida. They want to talk about your relative who disappeared almost 50 years ago. They want DNA samples. And then they tell you, we found him. We've known where he was since 1991. We just didn't know it was him until now. The New York State Police statement specifically thanks the families for their cooperation and notes that this identification has brought long-awaited answers to Mikolaj's family. Long-awaited is right. 49 years of waiting. But what kind of answers have they really gotten? They know where Mikolaj's remains were. They know he somehow ended up in that swamp in Greenville, but they may never know why. They may never know how he died. They may never know if it was peaceful or violent, accidental or intentional. That's the bittersweet nature of cold case resolutions. Even when science gives us answers, it doesn't always give us all the answers. But this identification didn't happen by accident. The technology that made it possible represents a complete revolution in how we investigate cold cases. An understanding that evolution is key to understanding why cases like this are suddenly being solved after decades. We've covered Mikolaj Salish's disappearance in 1976, the discovery of his remains in 1991, and the incredible breakthrough that finally gave him his name back in 2025. But this case is more than just one man's story. It's a perfect example of how cold case investigation has been revolutionized, and why mysteries that seemed unsolvable for decades are now being cracked open. Let's talk about DNA technology, because it's the real hero here. Back in 1991, when those remains were found, forensic DNA profiling was in its infancy. The first time DNA was used in a U.S. criminal case was just 1987. So The technology existed, but it was incredibly expensive, slow, and needed a lot of high-quality DNA to work with. The sample from Mikolaj's remains, which had been underwater for years, was heavily degraded. The techniques back then might have been able to extract something, but probably not enough for a definite match. And even if they got a profile, what would they do with it? There was no CODIS, the National DNA Database, until 1998. DNA was only useful if you already had a suspect to compare it to. You couldn't just search it against a national database of missing persons. Fast forward to today, and it's a completely different world. Modern DNA extraction can work with tiny degraded samples that would have been useless 30 years ago. We have genetic genealogy, which can build a family tree from a DNA profile. And we have incredible databases like nameless, the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, that link cases across the country. The remains didn't change, but our tools did. But it's easy to get lost in the tech and forget the most important part. None of this happens without human persistence. Think about the investigators in the New York State Police Cold Case Unit. They could have easily looked at this case file from 1991 and declared it a lost cause. The trail was ice cold, but they didn't. They kept resubmitting DNA samples every time a new technology or database became available. They kept checking missing person reports. They never stopped looking for a new angle. When familial DNA analysis got better, they tried it. When the FBI developed new document analysis techniques, they sent the evidence to Quantico. And when they finally got that lead pointing to Port Jervis, they didn't just make a phone call. They drove there themselves and spent hours digging through dusty, decades-old paper records until they found that one little blotter entry from October 1st, 1976. And then they got on a plane to Florida to talk to family members and collect DNA samples. That's not technology. That's pure dedication. That's a team of detectives who refused to let Mikolaj Salish remain a nameless victim. If this kind of relentless police work fascinates you as much as it does me, please make sure you're subscribed. We cover these incredible stories every week, and your support helps us bring them to light. And Mikolaj's case is not unique. All over the country, cold cases that have been sitting on shelves for decades are suddenly being solved thanks to modern forensics. Genetic genealogy, the same method that caught the Golden State Killer in 2018, has been a game changer. That case was cold for over 40 years, and genetic genealogy identified him in just a few months. Since then, hundreds of other cases have been solved the same way, giving names back to the unidentified and bringing closure to families after generations of not knowing. And it's not just DNA. We have digital forensics, advanced ballistics, improved facial recognition, and even social media analysis, breathing new life into old cases. But the task is huge. Right now, NamUs has over 14,000 unidentified human remains in its database. That's 14,000 people whose families are still waiting for an answer. 4,000 stories, just like Mikolaj Salish's, waiting for their moment of truth. And every year, more of those cases get solved. But this brings up some fascinating questions about justice. If you committed a crime back in the 70s or 80s and got away with it, you probably thought you were in the clear. Evidence degrades, witnesses pass away, memories fade. But DNA doesn't forget, and genetic genealogy doesn't care how much time has passed. There are people out there living normal lives with jobs and families who committed terrible crimes decades ago. And one day, a detective could knock on their door because a cold case hit just identified them. Is that justice? Or is it cruel to append someone's life for something they did half a century ago? I don't have the answer, but it's something to think about. This technology doesn't just solve mysteries. It changes our relationship with the past. Now, let's come back to Mikolaj Salish. Even with his name restored, the mystery is far from over. Why was he in Greenville, 40 miles from his home in Port Jervis? Did he know someone there? Was he just passing through? Or was he taken there? How did he die? The fact that police haven't released a cause of death suggests they either don't know or they're not telling us. Why was he partially buried? Was it deliberate or just the result of nature taking its course? And maybe the most haunting question of all, is someone still alive who knows what happened? Mikolaj disappeared in 1976. If someone was involved, and they were, say, 30 years old at the time, they'd be almost 80 now. It's entirely possible that the person who holds the final piece of this puzzle is still out there. That's why the New York State Police are still asking for tips. They've solved the who, but they still need to solve the what happened. This is what makes cold cases so compelling, isn't it? The search for truth never truly stops. If you found this deep dive as fascinating as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Your engagement helps get these stories in front of more people who care about finding answers. If there's one lesson from the Mikolaj Salish case, it's that no case is ever truly too cold to solve. Not if someone cares enough to keep trying. His remains were unidentified for 34 years. 34 years. That's longer than many of you watching have been alive. In that time, technology was completely revolutionized. Investigators retired and memories faded. But someone kept pushing. Someone kept submitting those DNA samples. Someone made that trip to Florida. And because of that persistence, a man who vanished in 1976 finally has his name back. He's no longer just unidentified remains from a drained swamp. He's Mikolaj Salish. He was 76 years old. He lived in Port Jervis, and he had a family who missed him. And now, they finally have at least part of the answer. The case is still open, and the New York State Police are still asking for information. If you know anything about what happened to Mikolaj Salish in 1976, please contact Troop F Communications at 845-3445-300. The case number is 3,021,756. It's been nearly 50 years, but it's never too late for the truth. We'll keep covering these stories, because these aren't just mysteries. They're people. They had lives, they had families, and they deserve to have their stories told. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you never miss another case. Drop a comment below with your theories on what happened to Mikolaj. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and remember, every unsolved case is someone's loved one waiting for answers.